Oh,
It's yelling at me.
cool. I was trying to find your tweet. Okay.
No, I'm getting us live first so that the links function as expected. And let me. Okay, we're live on YouTube. Let me get the YouTube link. Where am I? Here we go. Okay. There we go. And then live on X as well.
That's what I love Riverside. You use this, Nathan uses. A lot of people use. There's like Streamlit.
Yeah.
There's some others, but Riverside. I used this like 3 or 4 years ago for a podcast, but like, it's come so far.
Yeah, I was just gonna when I was peeking at what Nathan was using, I was like, I wonder what tooling he's using. Because if it's Riverside, then I know I've picked a good tool.
Yeah, no,
So
Riverside's they've been killing it for quite a while. Just the fact that it uploads like the raw
oh
video
yeah. And we can
is
send it to
super
our
cool.
editor who cuts these really awesome YouTube videos. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and then like
Okay.
if someone's internet's crazy, it still works.
Yeah, that too. I've posted stuff on Twitter if you can reshare.
Sweet, let me.
We'll get some folks joining us.
Oh, notification. Oh, it was on your OpenRouter. Okay. Sweet.
Okay, great. We've got some folks on YouTube. Got some folks on Twitter.
You
So,
mean X the everything app?
oh man, don't get me started. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to replace it in my head, even though I'm not really. I didn't really use Twitter until more recently. But anyways, let's kick things off. Lucas, thanks so much for joining me. Welcome everybody to another episode of the OpenRouter Show. Today's special episode is primarily going to be focused on RCAI and the incredible launch of Trinity Large preview that came out just yesterday. I want to congratulate you. I want to give you your flowers. I want to let the community ask you questions, talk a little bit about the future. Before we get into that, if you want to give a little quick intro about yourself and what Arcee is and something about Trinity.
Sweet, yeah. Thanks for having me. My name's Lucas. Obviously, I'm CTO over at RC. My background very much, unsurprisingly, is in open source AI. That's how I got into the AI space, kind of back in, publicly with like my work back in 2022, and then, it kind of grew into, leading tech here at RC. But RC's history was always, you know, way back, kind of right around the release of ChatGPT, even not just GPT-4. It was like, oh, companies, not just enterprises, but developers and businesses are going to have a hard time productionizing AI efficiently and cost effectively and like effectively, like making sure the thing they're building is useful for their clients or customers. So RC started very early on of like, hey, we need to have like a section of our company that is just research focused on making bespoke language models, task specific, all sizes, but mostly in the sub 10 billion parameter range. Super useful and super effective at one, two, three, four specific tasks that that client needs. And then we need another portion of the business that is, how can we convince people to use open source models, open weight models, and believe that they can kind of punch up next to their kind of closed peers. Uphill battle for sure for a couple of years, but I think everyone has kind of noticed it in the last. We had this kind of firm belief that there will come a time where they really start to catch up. And the last year in particular, but last 2 years, that's really started to show. So we but a lot of the customers, um, they have compliance teams, and it ends up being an issue when they're lawyers and they don't want them to use models that aren't in America, that they don't have, rules in place for. So when open source models kind of stopped being the norm in America, like roughly about a year ago, um, we thought it was a good opportunity for us to see if we could kind of do it ourselves because we didn't want to wait for someone else to. So that's kind of, obviously we'll get into all that, but that's where the idea of Trinity and doing our own pre-training came from, which was like, you know, why not? Let's give it a shot.
Yeah. So obviously you have this long experience making a bunch of specialized models, these smaller
Yeah.
models. You come around and you realize, all right, now's the time to take, in your blog posts, you went from thinking about pre-training as somebody else's job to something you
Yeah.
absolutely had to do in-house. You get this funny, I don't know how intentional this was, trinity of partnerships going. You've got Arcee, you've got Datology, you've got Prime Intellect working all together. How does that come about? Obviously, you realized, you wanted to take it seriously. You found the right partners. How has that process been?
The more and more that I think about that name, I'm so happy that that's what we ended up naming it. I didn't, because originally I did Trinity because it was like 3 models, but then I was like, oh well, it's 3 part, and it just keeps, it's
Trinity is
delightful.
all the way down.
Yeah, exactly. 3's all the way down. Rule of thirds.
Yeah.
So the initial, we've worked with Prime Intellect since probably July of 2024, just as we worked with them on Intellect One. Our research teams have always been, from the same circles. We've always worked really closely together, and I think really highly of that team. And they've also helped us infinitely manage kind of our compute for research and inference, just because that's what they've kind of made their bread and butter. But Datology came about as we were initially thinking about pre-training our own. This was probably March of 2025. Mark, who's the CEO, and I kind of talk of Arcee. We kind of talked like, okay, can we actually do this? Can we do it well? Can we do it better than others? And I had a team of, at the time, like 12 researchers, and very like unbelievably cracked team. But I just knew that if like we were going to pull something off in a short amount of time, that we needed to kind of ruthlessly optimize and like ruthlessly compartmentalize our responsibilities. Just getting enough comfortable enough running a cluster big enough and managing failover nodes and machines going down, and it was like that enough was a tall enough order, let alone architecturally and just length. I mean, there was so like, it's one of those things where you look at it and there's so many things to check off that it can be overwhelming. So I was like, okay, well, let's just like focus on one thing at a time. But one of the things that I learned working in a lot of the post training space is like data is, you can do everything else perfectly, but if your data isn't in order, you're gonna have a bad time. So I knew a lot of the Datology team, from some of them were at Mosaic, and I'd kind of followed their work really closely when they kind of first went public and, announced themselves in 2024. I just reached out to Ari and the team there, and we chatted, and yeah, it just became clear to me that like, if we wanted a shot at doing this really, really well, it was let's work with other people who are ruthlessly focused on their domain. So
Yeah.
it was first with Datology, and then after we did our first model, which was a 4.5 billion parameter, and we kind of gave ourselves the confidence to like, you know what, we learned so much in the month that it took to do this. If we just take all that and put it towards kind of the next models, we can kind of exponentially get better each time. And then that's when Prime Intellect got involved, because they were thinking along the same lines as far as like, hey, I bet we could do this. They were starting to get the same level of confidence, and
Right.
we knew we wanted to go make sure of experts as we scaled, and kind of the rest is history.
Yeah, I liked reading a little bit about how when you approached Datology, you were giving them kind of this big task that you weren't sure if they'd be willing to do, and they were like, "Let's do it. We're so
It
down."
was similar to us, right? Like our whole thing
Yeah.
was like do more with less. Like get what you need for less money. And I remember I literally said it to Ari in one of our first conversations. We did like a little test run, just comparing them against like some other open data set, and the results came back really good, but it was only 100 billion tokens. And so I remember coming up to him and saying, all right, like your whole thing is do more with less. Can I ask you to do more with more?
Do more with more. I love that quote. It's so fun. Oh man. All right. So I think For the people that want to really get into the nitty gritty about Arcee's origins and how we got to Trinity, I think there's a lot of really awesome tech reports and blog posts that you guys just put out. I want to give a shout out to Stochasm, one of the folks on your team who's
Yes.
actually watching the stream earlier. I believe
Go.
it's his first tech report. Yeah. I have it on my to-do to go read that, but definitely recommend folks go through that as well. Prime released their own version. So there's a bunch of stuff to read about how we got here. What I'm really excited to talk about today is kind of looking forward. We have on OpenRouter today for free the Trinity Large preview instruct. Right, so this is Trinity Large was trained to be a reasoning model. We are currently working out the kinks, so to speak, to get reasoning fully functioning. So I'm curious, kind of looking forward, what do we have to look forward to? What else are you thinking about coming down the pipeline once you go from instruct to reasoning? How does the model behave differently? Do you see improvements obviously in benchmarks, but like where are you most excited to see reasoning? And then once we get through reasoning, maybe we can talk a little bit more about the meaning behind the preview title and how that expands going forward.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that was most not unexpected, because we designed it with this in mind, but when was how fast the model was. Like, I think that was something that when you're training it, you can see like graphs of tokens per second, and you're like, oh, that's high. But when it's spread across 2,000 GPUs, like, it can be very hard to think about like how fast it actually is on an individual session. So when we got into post training, I don't we just like the smaller like mini model that we did in December. I was like, let's like jump into a reasoning model, because we know that people are going to compare it against other reasoning models, and so we didn't necessarily, like, in my mind, I didn't want to do an instruct only, because I didn't want people to compare it against like Quinn Max thinking or whatever, because it's a completely different beast. But
Yeah.
as we were going through post training, when we started to use it, we're testing it and vibe testing it. It was so fast that I thought, wow, like this is actually a pretty unique opportunity, because people don't use a lot of instruct models anymore, but there are a lot of use cases that benefit from it, right? You have your voice agents, you have anything that is like needs a pretty quick response that doesn't need to go through 8 rounds of what ifs is pretty powerful. You have your creative writing, you have your general chatbots. There were many areas where we had always planned on doing a preview. Now, whether that preview was instruct or thinking was kind of up for debate, but we'd always said, let's get it pre-trained, let's get it context extended, let's get it out, and then buy ourselves some time to like take it really as far as we can in the next month or so.
Let me
But it
chime in
just
here for a sec. I'm curious, a little bit of a tangent. We've seen, obviously, OpenRouter kind of kicked off this advent of stealth models and the concept of getting some early customer feedback before you go with your last snapshot, or sometimes even you test your most recent snapshot as a stealth model and then you go live with that anyway. In this kind of preview phase, how much are you able to squeeze more juice out of what's there given customer feedback, evals, benchmarks? I think that is something that is somewhat confusing. The folks that follow LM Arena, for example, will often try to track the different snapshots of a model from proprietary labs as they go through the motions, right? There's like a month worth of testing, and sometimes you can kind of feel the difference, tell the difference. I think a lot of that is pretty opaque to people right now. What does that look like for you guys? How do you think about that?
It's interesting, because I would argue. No, I wouldn't argue. I would just say we're not there yet. And the way I'll put it is, um, because each time we've trained one of our own models, whether it's 4.5B to nano to mini to now large, it's a different post training's a different beast every single time, especially with the MOEs, as you get like sparser and more experts, and each expert's bigger. And then with large, we went from having 8 active per token to 4. The dynamics of post training change. It's not the same as just like throwing it into some, post training script, hitting a data set and going. Like, the hyperparameters, the way you're doing load balancing, the way that those experts are being utilized, it becomes it becomes less of a battle of like, how do we make sure we post train to the best, and more of like, how do we make sure we're making the most use of every expert. So because our timelines have been so tight, we've never really been in a situation where we've had a checkpoint that we're really happy with, and then we say, okay, now we have a couple weeks to have people try it stealthed and to get feedback, and then we'll take another month to improve it. Like, it really is like very, kind of by this, we're going very fast. And when we get a checkpoint that we like, we're kind of just like, all right, let's get it out there and let's see. Hence preview.
Right.
Um, and I think that, we do have the reasoning model, internally, and we've tested it. And what I said in my blog was true. It's like it scores very well on benchmarks,
Mhm.
but it talks for a very long time for pretty simple requests. You know, it it's it scores like GLM and Minimax and others on, again, academic benchmarks, your artificial analysis and those kind of things. But would I choose it over GLM or others right now? No, because the output tokens are so much more per response. And
Yeah.
so when I was thinking about like, no, we really want to like promote usage, and we want it to get into people's hands. We want them to vibe test what we're able to do with an instruct model. It became clear to us like, let's get it out. Let's see what people like, about its personality, about the way its opinions, the way it responds to things, and then use that to inform kind of the research effort we're on now, which is, okay, how do we take all this great performance and then compress that thinking down, maybe add interleaved thinking a la Minimax and GLM, as opposed to the kind of DeepSeek and Quinn style where it's just like really big chunks.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. The goal always has been, let's get to a spot where we can maybe not have as much pressure, whether internally or financially or whatever, to get something out, and let's give ourselves some time to actually take the last 6 months of research we've done and all of the things we've learned and compress that into, all right, let's take 3 months, figure out exactly what we want to do, kind of for our next series of models. But there's so much that we didn't have time to ablate or even test because we had to get these models out. If we wanted, we
Yeah.
started design. I said this with Nathan, but it's true. Is like when we decided we wanted to do a big MOE, that was 6 months ago. But we also knew it was going to take about 6 months. So when we were designing it, we had to be thinking about where do we think the models are going to be in 6 months and design for that, as opposed to what would have been competitive 6 months ago, which is GLM 4.5 hadn't even come out. Like it was very,
Yeah.
the wave in the last 6 months has been pretty nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think I could spend a whole 30 minutes to an hour talking about this trend of reasoning models coming out and scoring highly, but being extremely verbose, and how
Yeah.
everybody's trying to find that like perfect happy medium, right? Where Anthropic is pretty good about this. They're relatively concise in their reasoning traces, but also you turn reasoning off and ask it a difficult question, it spits out essentially as many tokens as if it was reasoning anyway. So there's still
Yeah.
some weirdness there. But without us getting too deep into that, um, I think partially from my understanding, but also for the community understanding, are you saying you essentially have two different weights for the instruct and for the reasoning, or
Yeah.
what does that kind of look like in terms
Well,
of a
I
deployment?
mean, yeah. As of right now, like one, what's interesting is one was trained like from post training. They're not like different pre
Mhm.
trained weights or anything.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, one was post trained basically entirely as a reasoner. The other
Mhm.
one was post trained, from instruct. That's one that's out. Um, One of the things we found that was interesting was like when we threw in a lot of the thinking and reasoning SFT, which you do to like warm it up so that it's easier to RL it towards that behavior. Uh, the router sending these tokens to each expert to be sure that the proper experts are being utilized for each different token, uh, was responding very. It did not like all the reasoning token. Like it really did not know what to do, which experts to send them to. Um, and so like, and the initial SFTs were always like quite chaotic. Whereas with the more instruct related data, it was much more stable. So like the next, there's quite a lot to do as far as And a lot of that warm-up data, like that SFT, is inherently already verbose because it's coming from reasoning models that have gone through that already. So
Right.
I think kind of as we look to take that further and kind of compress that into something useful, like a very interesting area for us is like, well, what if we just took the instruct model now that's already kind of been warmed up and it's seen some reasoning tokens in mid-training. What if we take that and like literally turn that into a thinking model, kind of the what you'd think of as the OG way, which is, you have an instruct model, warm it up on a little bit of like really long chain of thought data, and then start to incentivize it to think in tags before it answers in RL. So there's a few ways to go forward here, but yeah, as of right now, there's a reasoning version which isn't released, and then the instruct model which is.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Um, so obviously we're talking about preview. We're talking about instruct now. Reasoning will be coming soon. What does it look like for you guys? What are the metrics or heuristics that are going to make you happy going from preview to calling something production or generally available, or whatever the like full release of Trinity is going to look like? What are you looking for, and how do you hope that'll change the vibe scores or the benchmarks?
Well, it's weird, man, because it's like if we're
It's not easy to say,
optimizing.
huh?
No, it isn't, but I think that because there's what I would like it to be, right, and then there's the
Sure.
reality of what people actually use. What I
Yeah.
would like it to be is, the metrics are based on like long context, uh, coherence, and is it able to do 20, 30, 40 tool calls in a row without human input on some arbitrary task and still remember what the initial task was. Like those are the things that I think are really useful for not just a developer but a business or an enterprise putting it into production. And those are the things I care about. Now, there's some overlap with what I think the metrics need to be in order for it to be taken seriously, but a lot of that's like just coding. And I think that coding is one of the most useful areas for it to be like exceptional at, just because it by far is the area where they are used the most right now, and have the most kind of impact per dollar spent is definitely
Right.
using them to speed up and optimize coding. Uh, and there is some overlap between, right, obviously a really good coding agent can go 30, 40 turns,
Yeah.
but they're often very, at least as of right now, they're very overfit in that area, like to coding. So if you take like a coding model that's really good at that, then throw it in, some kind of like ticket and platform support specialist role where it has to go and look at a bunch. They often won't be. It won't be as good at that as it is at coding. And
Right.
so, if it was up to me, the metric for success would be like, hey, like can we take this into an arbitrary task inside of an enterprise or inside of a new startup, and it can, pretty just off, matter, like, can it just take a pretty arbitrary task and figure out how to solve it? You see a lot of that was like with what Opus 4.5 is able to do now, right? With just being able to kind of figure out a fuzzy task on its own just by the more tokens you let it think. But I mean, I think really the metric for us is like, is this thing going to be, a competitive coder? And so we're looking at stuff like SweetBench, obviously Live Code Bench. A lot of the Chinese labs have released their own, like Minimax did their own Vibe Bench, which is very cool. We're going to obviously be working on our own internal stuff. So I think the metrics for me will be like right now, even the instruct model, it's like a really good code reviewer. It's also like a really good searcher. Like, hey, I need to find where this, where this function imports from, or I need to figure, like, it's very good at file discovery. But like as a day-to-day like replacement of Sonnet or Opus, not yet. So I think that'll kind of be our metric is are people gonna be able to throw this in next to Minimax and GLM and like actually replace it?
Yeah. That's a really good point. Um, kind of want to get off on a tangent on a little bit of enterprise model adoption,
Let's do it.
but maybe before we get in there, I want to shout out Scaling O1 or Lisan Al Gaib in chat asked a good question.
Lisa and Algaib.
Um, yeah, my favorite Anon poster. Obviously, you released Trinity Mini and Nano first. So
Yep,
Lisan is asking, do you plan on distilling large back into Mini and Nano,
for sure.
or kind of is there anything planned there?
Yeah, I think that yeah, we released Mini and Nano. The reason Nano was like a preview was that thing's like an alien species, man. It has so many. It's so small. And it's 6B total, 1B active, but has 56 layers, which is more than Mini, and almost as much as Large. Large has 60. Like it's a very deep model, literally. And it was just like it was beautiful for an instruct model, but when we did thinking, like it was one of those where it was very similar to actually this release of Large, where it's like, man, I wish I could take 2 months and just like figure out how to make this thing sing. But I have a compute reservation for 2,000 B300s coming on tomorrow. I got to get it out, and that's kind of been the kind of mo for us over the last 6 months has been like always getting onto the next thing, because we don't have time to sit and think too much about it, ironically. Um, but one thing I've noticed just from people using Mini and Nano, using it ourselves internally, because Mini is definitely the first model we had internally where we could actually kind of dog food it, as far as like we have this internal Slack agent that parses through Twitter and finds mentions of Trinity and helps us get like what it's good at, what it's not. That's all used by Mini. It's a really good kind of like for general agent purposes. But the one thing we've wanted to do is like, man, I want to get back to making like a V2 of those. I think part of that is going to be, I think that a lot of our revenue and work with enterprises and developers eventually is going to come from Mini. I don't think it's going to come from something like Large, because someone deploying Large in there, like it's just inherently more expensive because it's a bigger model. So yeah, I want to start work on a second version of Mini and Nano, so like an actual, whether a continued pre-train or a new pre-train entirely, but definitely we have people on the team working on proper distillations of Mini and just like better post-trains of it entirely.
Yeah, I
Because
think
the
the
ceiling for those models is absurdly high. Like they can really go far, but again, because we're up against this time, it's like there's a certain date where we had to go, and just giving them the time they need is gonna be super important.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I think this consideration of a bunch of people are going to end up using Mini in terms of actual deployments is super
Yeah.
interesting. We I think the Twitter bubble is really focused on the soda models, the best models.
Yeah.
How much can I pay to get marginal improvements? But what we've seen at OpenRouter, kind of the state of the AI report, shows that often the actual deployments that end up having long-term use are the smaller models, or the models that have that Cinderella effect. Cinderella effect's the
Mm-hmm.
wrong term. The glass
Goldilocks
slipper.
effect.
Glass slipper is what we called it, where the slipper fits and you stick to it.
Yep.
And that doesn't just happen to the biggest and the best models. That also happens to the smaller models, and especially with enterprise teams, they find models that are open, that are fast enough, that have low enough latency, that meet their security and compliance requirements. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how Arcee is positioning themselves both now and kind of in the future with these models being all American. The Atom project being part of all of
Yeah.
this, which we're actually contributing some data to the Atom project soon.
Oh,
I
fantastic.
hope Nathan will be able to publish that shortly. But we've got some fun stuff to share there too. Yeah, how do you think about enterprise deployments? Why is an enterprise customer different than your random anon poster on Twitter, and how the Trinity models kind of fit into that?
I think they are different. They're also not. Like it's a we have like a very different opinion of it than a lot of maybe the Twitter bubble, or just like the AI, the people who are super into this field and kind of staying up with what's state of the art constantly. But I think it ultimately comes down to, if you are constantly pushing the models towards something that they're not good at now, and you are going to constantly be trying to use the newest ones that come out for that thing, right? Like coding is a good example. Like it's had a renaissance in the last year. It was good in 2024, but they became really excellent in 2025. Now you have a lot of people, myself included, who don't code manually anymore. It's just like figuring out now it's just like, okay, what do I want it to do? And then double checking that it did what I wanted it to do, not going in and manually fixing it. And so obviously those are always going to be what is state of the art, you're always going to use the best model, and the only thing that matters is that your model is the best, which makes it tricky for us when we're doing these launches, right? Which is there are a huge swath of people who they just need something that works, is fast, cheap, has good long context support, and it can handle whatever their, less soda requirement app is, whether it's something like invoice processing or, classification or filtering. Like those people will get, they just need something fast, cheap, as you said, and good at instruction following. Whereas the people that give it the popularity at first that allow us to then be seen by that other crowd are the people who want something to be soda and the best kind of at all times. So, yeah, I mean, you have teams that are still using like Llama 3 8B. That was something that was really surprising to us when we did the 4.5B, which was almost all of our customers, whether we were working with them for like a custom model or we were working with people on, taking like distilling down from some larger model into a smaller one, that like Llama 3AB was like kind of like the perfect size, and Mistral 7B was before it because it did 80% of the things that people needed it to, but was ridiculously fast, fit on one like L40S GPU, and could serve their 100 concurrent requests. And that's why I feel that like as these smaller models get better, I think Flash from GLM 4.7 Flash, like the one they just released, is like a really good example of that. Of like they're gonna get to a point where they're not just bespoke at like one really good task. They're gonna be like, instead of being good at 80% of things, they're gonna start getting good at 95% of things. And then your large models, like large, no pun intended, size 400B plus, those are gonna start going towards like scientific work and like the really kind of cutting edge stuff that I'm at a point now where it's very hard for me to even like vibe check the difference between 5.2 and Gemini 3 because I just don't have the intelligence to understand if they're even better, right?
Yeah.
So I think 2026 is going to be a very big year for small models, mid-size even. I think the 100B range like is going to be super sick as well, and we
Mhm.
definitely want to be on the leading edge of that by the end of this year. In order to do that, we need to kind of go as big as we can, learn everything we can, and then take all of those skills into like cramming in as much intelligence into a small model.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm also curious, and maybe this is somewhat of a personal prediction. Hardware moves much slower than model releases nowadays, but we're definitely going to come to a time where small models are no longer less than 10B, right? We're talking about small
Yeah,
models in a couple of years being 20, 30, 40B active as hardware gets
awesome.
better. Obviously, we're not quite there yet, but as consumer hardware gets better and NVIDIA gets Cerebrus Grok making their
Yep.
chips better or whatever, well, it'll be fun and interesting to look at there. And that's a whole other tangent of a dream future. But I think you touched on a couple of points there that I think are relevant to kind of bring up, make sure folks understand when these models get deployed outside of the Twitter bubble, right? Where the Twitter bubble is, as I was saying earlier, Opus, Gemini, GPT. When you're talking about the model that you use in production for your internal agents or for processing stuff, coming back to the State of AI report, what we saw is a lot of teams end up using open models for a variety of reasons,
Yeah, a lot
compliance,
of them have to. Yeah.
security. Yeah, like there's just no other option, especially in regulated industries like finances, et cetera. And so personally, I'm excited to give these American teams that are obviously America's on the cutting edge of AI. Everybody's trying to implement it. Every public company in the world has investors pushing them to use AI more and more, giving them that option of, hey, your data, the data that was used to train this model, sourced in the US, was created by US teams, trained in the US. I think is going to be a really interesting perspective, and I'm wishing you guys the best of luck. We'll definitely be pitching you guys to some enterprise customers as they come around with questions about, hey, we need compliance, but also we want to use open models in the US. How can they do that? So I think that'll be an interesting one, and we'll make it easier for us to sell our business too as a US company working with a lot of US enterprise teams. So do you have anything to
I mean,
comment there as learnings along that
that's
line?
why we did this, and
Right.
it's very interesting. I can I can wax poetic all day about the frontier and what I think models are should be doing that they're not already doing. But like at the end of the day, like we are a venture backed company that has to make revenue, and like that is often antithetical with open sourcing often anything, but especially models, which are like the fastest depreciating asset in history. Like you release it, you train it for like several $1 million, you release it, and then 2 weeks later it's no one's going to use it because it's not it's not the best anymore. So it's we're very lucky that we have like a leadership team and a team of investors who like believed in this mission as well. But like the
Yeah.
reason we're doing this is we personally had a lot of experiences where, especially early last year, it actually lined up really well with when we were kind of thinking of doing this in the first place, where we were working with some customers either through like our platform or for some more high profile customers, we were working with them one on one, and the potential for like a very big partnership, a very big deal, huge for us both financially but also press wise. And the task they were wanting to kind of specialize or distill into a very tiny model was pretty cutting edge, and it required starting from the best open source model. However, they required that it be from like a US based company. And the best was that we could use for that size was gonna be Llama 3.23b, which
Right.
at the time was a year behind. The best was at the time Quinn 2.5, like 3b or 2.6b or whatever it was. And we couldn't use the best. We had to use Llama, and that's like handicapping ourselves. Like it was like I didn't we didn't it wasn't impossible given kind of what was what Llama was able to do. And so it was kind of this big eye-opening moment where we realized, like as a company who wants to get AI embedded as cheaply and as efficiently as possible in as many companies, all the way from a mom and pop store to Fortune 500, if we didn't have the capability of owning the full layer, like if we didn't have the ability to make the model the best model possible for the task, we would always be beheld to other companies to do our job. And that didn't sit right with us. We like the fact that we needed other large companies like Meta to release models in order for us to do our job well felt it didn't sit right with us. So we knew that while a lot of the models coming out of China and were open, and that those were that was great for us, for other companies, for other contracts that didn't require that. Um, that wasn't sustainable, and who knows kind of how the politics and public image of these things is going to change over
Yeah.
time. Like we can't control that, but what we can control is that we have the talent and the team and the capability to make good models. So over the next 3 years, like I'm a huge believer, and I think a lot of people in our circle are as well, but just in general, that like the best AI products are going to be ones where the model is learning from real world usage and kind of hill climbing on things that aren't benchmarks. And the only way to do that is to throw it into production, figure out what it's doing well, and then build out these systems and harnesses to do reinforcement learning kind of over real world data, real world stuff. You see a lot of like Claude Code, even Codex, but Deep Research was kind of the first one that blew my mind as far as like, oh, giving it this fuzzy task and having the right verifiers and then throwing
Mm,
compute at it. Like you can
right.
make these things unbelievable on tasks that were previously thought possible. And I think that that's only going to become more and more true as companies that aren't big labs are trying to productize AI, is that they need the ability to own these models and like do training on them in real time and improve them the more it's used. You need
Mhm.
open models for that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
when that starts happening in mid-sized to Fortune 100 companies, they need models from wherever they are. And if it's in America, they need American models. If it's Europe and they need to deal with the regulations in Europe, they need companies out of there. If they're in China, they're going to need models out of there. And
Yeah.
we weren't satisfied with like, oh, Nvidia releases open models and open data, because we'd seen that with Meta, and we've seen that with a few others where if their main source of income, like if their bread and butter is not releasing open models, which for them it's not, there's always a chance that they just stop because maybe the monetary incentive isn't there, maybe new leadership comes in, maybe there's pressure from whatever the political administration is. Like, there's no guarantee they're going to keep doing that. And so we
Yep.
had the feeling that, no, there needs to be like a lab whose sole purpose and bread and butter and livelihood is staying at the frontier of open models. And we thought, why not us? So that's kind of where we're at, which is like we might not have the capex capability of Meta and Nvidia or others. We might not have the funding or the huge thousands and thousands of people of talent, but we do have a mission, like a small group of people who are deeply hungry, scrappy, and love working and training these models and building them in the open. And we think that, with our previous line of business, our future lines of business, like, they've all surrounded and been operated because of open models. If we're the ones making them, we're only going to be able to be more effective with our customers. So it's kind of a win-win for us.
Yeah. Well, that just made me even more bullish on Arcee. I think your perspective and the vision and the goals and the experience, it's all just lining up to really push you guys forward. And I think personally, I mean, OpenRouter succeeds if open models succeed. So obviously we have a financial incentive to be supportive of you guys. Yeah, but really just even personally, I think it's going to be so awesome to see hopefully a budding ecosystem of American open source. I would love for you guys to succeed, but also I want you guys to have competition so that everybody succeeds a little bit, right? At this point we have countless labs in China dropping SOTA open models all the time. We recently saw Korea had a government-sponsored kind of ecosystem of labs
for like 2 weeks.
Yeah. And so that's going to be really interesting to see. Obviously, we have teams like Mistral and Black Forest Labs also doing their own open releases. So I think 2026 is going to be really, really exciting for, like you were saying, everything open. And I'm hoping you guys get to do some really awesome stuff. We've got just a couple of minutes left. I want to open it up to audience and let anybody ask any questions they'd like to ask. But otherwise, Lucas, now's your chance to, of course, do any last minute pitching, shout anybody out. Yeah, feel free to take the floor. If there's anybody in your chat or community that wants to ask some questions.
Where can I see chat?
You can pull it up on Twitter, but they don't load previous messages because they're terrible at stuff.
Oh,
YouTube has some chat. Somebody had a quick question. Will the Trinity reasoning weights be hybrid reasoning? Like, will you be able to turn reasoning on and off? Or is it just like you're hitting the reasoning endpoint, you're getting reasoning?
Almost certainly it'll be just reasoning. There's ongoing debate and not just debate, but like research on whether or not it's effective for hybrid. Obviously, NVIDIA's had some pretty good success with it, but you are somewhat constrained in the things and ways you're able to do reinforcement learning and post-training. If you're trying to do these like really hard problems that are kind of the best for reasoning models because you can really kind of stress the model, you can sometimes nerf yourself by also trying to have a version of it that's non-reasoning. Like, there's the considerations become, everything you're trying to do that's already difficult, you're kind of making it inherently twice as difficult. So I don't think so. I would it currently isn't. That's not to say we couldn't do some merging, which is our bread and butter, and try to do that. But I think that if I'm making a pretty strong, which I guess I'm ultimately the one who decides, I don't think it will be. At least, I'm not saying we won't ever, but we already have a tall enough order, trying to make something that we find is both benchmark good and real world useful. I wouldn't add in also. That's not to say we might not do an update of the instruct version. Like that instruct version is, as far as post training goes, like compared to our pre-training budget, it's 1% as large as far as how much compute was thrown into it. So there's ceilings for both areas, but they'll likely be discrete.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, because I think the person who asked this maybe lacking some detail, the current model that you can access for free is Trinity Large Preview on OpenRouter is the instruct version of the post-trained weights of Trinity Large. So go check that out today. I want to push the community to try it out in your favorite tools, try it in your agent harnesses, try it for a bunch of the use cases that got mentioned throughout this podcast, and give us some feedback. I'm monitoring the OpenRouter Discord and Twitter and going to be passing some feedback along to Arcee. As you heard, they have their own little Twitter bot scanning for mentions of Trinity, which I think is super neat and gives me an idea for some stuff I want to build internally. Yeah, I
please
think
let us know where it breaks. Like, there's areas we definitely already know it breaks. Like, as I said, don't try to replace Gemini, GLM 4.7 with it. Like, it's not gonna have a good time. But as much as where it does break, we also want to know where it's very good. Like, Lisan
right.
Al-Gaib, for instance, did like SVG comparisons versus it and Maverick. I had no idea it could even do that. Like, I was like very surprised that it did it at all. Those are the kind of things that are helpful for us because that helps us know, like, oh, okay, this was something we didn't even think we could improve, let alone now we want to. So
Right.
all feedback's good feedback.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm personally running a little competition in the RC Trinity Large thread in the OpenRouter Discord. The top like 5 pieces of feedback I'm going to sponsor some OpenRouter credits for. So join us on
For sure.
Discord and help us out there.
Yeah,
All
we'd
right.
love that.
Thanks so much, Lucas. It's been a pleasure. Congrats
I really
again
appreciate it.
on
You
the
guys are
model.
awesome.
Yeah. And everybody, go check it out. It's free and it's a really good model.
All right. Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.